So I am going to get started. Thank everybody for joining us. So as I said, this presentation originally, and the lead up to this was, Annika was going to lead it. Of course, I'd be part of it. Annika unfortunately cannot be with us here today, but we are going to talk some about cultural humility. We're going to talk some about connecting that into the classroom. I want to thank you for spending some of your Friday with us today, because it is a unusually nice day in Oswego for January. As I look out on the sort of green, still green grass in my backyard. But let's get moving. So I'm going to move us forward. Oops, hold on. Okay. Some guidelines for dialogue. These are not going to be anything unusual, things like this. Really, these are general things that when we do sessions, guidelines like this, we're going to focus on dialogue, not debate. We really ask folks to be active listeners. We ask folks to, as a part of that, to not talk over one another, not interrupt one another. Really, one speaker at a time kind of thing to be important. It's important to challenge the idea or claim, not the person, we won't replicate the things that we see out in the world. We're going to be better than that. Use I statements. Speak from your own experience, not necessarily speaking for others unless they have given you their permission and consent to speak for them. Everyone is encouraged to share. No one is required to share. Okay, but the more we invest in this content, the more we work on it, the more we share, the better this presentation will go. Because you don't want to just listen to the dulcet tones of my voice, which will, over 50 minutes, put you into a deep, deep sleep if we're not actually engaging with one another. Be aware, be sensitive to issues of power and privilege and things like this. So what does that mean? Look, we have people on the phone that are various positionalities, both professionally and otherwise, within the institution. We have people with various positionalities in society because of where our intersecting identities place us within society and things like this, right? So being a cisgendered heterosexual male, there's things that I have and privileges that I have that can inform conversations, and I need to be aware of the ways in which my intersecting identities can open up or close conversations, and be aware of the ways that I, as an individual, can inadvertently, subconsciously, not knowingly, silence or lessen the voices of others. So, any questions about that before I jump forward? I'll stop sharing for a second. Any questions about the rules of discourse? Okay, so we'll jump back in. All right, just want to check. Okay, so what to expect. So we're going to talk some, you as a participant are going to get some information. We'll talk about some resources as well. We're going to do some challenging reflections, okay? And again, people have different experiences, different life experiences, different education around these issues, different things. People will take different things from the reflections and the breakout sessions of these, but they're meant to be challenging but not disturbing, right? Some of the content may be triggering. We're going to be talking about experiences and things and doing reflections that will ask people to reflect deeply about themselves and their experiences. So please practice self-care. If you need to step away for a second or things like that, if you are experiencing some emotions around the content that we're talking about, please, I'm here. You can DM me or another one of the presenters, and we can kind of sidebar and talk about that. And I'm always happy to talk about things after the presentation as well. Okay, so let's keep rolling. What are the goals of the presentation? Really on a very sort of basic level to understand some conceptions of cultural humility and cultural competence and what the difference between them may be. There's been a lot written about this. There's a lot of different opinions or thoughts about this. We're not going to go deeply through the literature, but we're going to talk basically about the concepts and things like that. We're going to understand maybe some barriers and strategies around maintaining or creating an inclusive learning environment. And then maybe talk some about how to actively or proactively address challenging or harmful behaviors in the classroom, harmful behaviors in society, or things like that, things that impact one another in not positive ways. Okay. Some key concepts we're going to go talk about. And this is not an exhaustive list, but full participation. We're going to talk some about social identities. We're going to talk some about cultural competence. We're going to talk some about cultural humility and cultural safety, among other things. Okay. So let's get into it. I want to do some introductions because I'm not sure that everybody knows one another. I'm pretty sure that I know everybody who's in the session, but what I will do is I'll start with myself and the staff of the Diversity and Inclusion Office that are here. We'll give our names. You can give your pronouns, optional. You don't have to, but I think it's important for us, if there are pronouns that you use, that we know them and respect that. In what areas do you work or teach? Both. I'm sure faculty and staff here. And how long have you been with the institution? So I'm gonna stop sharing for a second, okay? And I'll start myself. Dr. Rodman King. I am a junior here. It's been my third year of service at the college. It'll be 3 years, I think, coming this summer. Chief Diversity and Inclusion Office. I use he series pronouns, he, him, his, okay? And so I will ask Tiffany to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Tiffany Pena, but I mainly go by Tiff. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a graduate student in the school counseling program here, and I've been with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion since last semester because I was their intern, and now I'm transitioning into other roles. Yeah.
Great. Markel.
Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. My name is Markel. I go by the pronouns he, him, and his. I'm a May 29th graduate of SUNY Oswego. I was invited to work in the Office of Diversity with Dr. King March of last year. So I'm blessed to be back. And my position as Assistant Coordinator for Diversity and Inclusion.
Erin Leary.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Erin. I'm with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion with Rodman. I've been there since this past March, same as Markel. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm the administrative assistant. And I'm here not as a presenter, but as a listener. Thank you.
So I'm just going to go on the, from my left to right on my screen for folks. So I'm not picking on anybody. It's just how you're appearing on my screen. So Rebecca, I know you're in the background, but invite you to, yeah.
I'm Rebecca Mushter. I'm a faculty member in graphic design and interaction design. I've been here since 2012. I had to think about that for a minute. I'm also the associate director of our teaching and learning center, and I go by the pronouns of she and her.
Great. Colleen.
Hi, I work at the Penfield Library. I'm a librarian clerk, and I have been here since, it'll be 2 years, February, I think 23rd next month. So
Fantastic.
I go by she, her.
Great to have you. Liz Schmidt.
Hello, everyone. I'm Liz Schmidt. I'm chair of faculty assembly, and I'm a professor in the economics department. And this is my 25th year at Oswego, and I use she, her, hers.
Great. Scott Cunningham.
Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Cunningham. I am currently in the EOP office. I've been there for 1.5 years, but I've been working for Residence Life and Housing, the transfer services, and EOP for 12 years at Oswego. And I go by he and his and him.
Mamta. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Mamta Saxena, and I'm an assistant professor in human development. I have been here for 4 years, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
Sarah Weissman. Sarah.
Morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Weissman. I'm at Penfield Library. I had to just do some math, figure out how long I've been here, 4.5 years. And I go by she, her, and hers.
Awesome. Allison Rank. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Allison Rank, she, her, hers. I'm an associate professor in the political science department, and I'm in my 7th year.
Joe Copeland.
Hi, I'm Jo Goplin, she, her, hers. I'm an assistant professor of psychology, but also I direct the Gender and Women's Studies program.
Awesome. Lizette.
So, good morning, everybody. This is Alvarado, Office of International Education and Programs. And I'm Associate Director of Education Abroad, and I coordinate education abroad programs in Latin America and some areas in Europe. And I've been at Oswego for about 20 years.
Wow, great. So lots of Oswego experience. Fantastic. Thank you, Lizette. Allison McGinley.
Good morning, everyone. I am Allison McGinley. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. I have been on campus for about 6 years now, and in the International Education Office for 2 or 3 years. I got to do some math, but I am the Education Abroad Secretary, and happy to be here.
Nice to meet you. I don't think we've ever talked before, but nice to meet you. It's the beautiful thing about these Zoom sessions. You get to meet folks that you do definitely now in COVID will not run into. So, Michael Chanis.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Chanis. I'm a visiting assistant professor, and I have like 1 foot in anthropology and 2 feet in Native American studies. My pronouns are he, him, and his.
Great. Kristen Croyle.
Good morning. I'm Kristen Croyle. I'm the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, and I am in month 19. You're allowed to count months until 2 years. If you have kids, you know that.
Great. Zoe.
Hi, I'm Zoe Miswich. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I teach in the math department where my focus is on increasing student success in the courses before calculus. And this is my 2nd year at Oswego. I don't know exactly how many months.
Great. Lynn Reese.
Hi, I'm Lynn Reese. I am the Associate Director of the library, she, her, hers, and I've been here about 2.5 years.
Carol.
Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Willard. I am in the Curriculum and Instruction Department in the School of Ed. I go by the pronouns she, her, hers, and I have been here for about 7 years.
Great. Naja.
Hello, everyone. My name is Naja Zaid. Some people might call me Najah. I am she, her, also yamma, mama, it. Just thought I'd add some humor because I hear that a lot these days. Department of Health Promotion and Wellness. And I've been here for a total of 5 years.
Kelsey Gillette.
Hi, my name is Kelsey, she, her, hers. I graduated from Oswego in 2014, and I've been working in international ed as a study abroad coordinator for about 3 years.
Great. Let's see who else we've got here. I think that might be everybody. There's just someone who is circ staff. I don't know who that is. But if you want to introduce yourself, that's great. Okay. And I think the last person that I have on my screen is Nirdishatha. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Please forgive me if I'm not.
It's okay. So my name is Nirdishtha Sapkota. I'm actually an undergrad student.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm here mostly because I was just taking sessions for the accessibility challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also helping one of my professors with like notes and stuff because she can't attend some of the sessions.
We're glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Wonderful. And look, I know we spent a bunch of time on this, but it's good to know who's on the call and to know each other and things like this, and because it's important. So let's keep moving on. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to keep moving. Okay. I want you to reflect for a second, and I'm actually going to have us do a word cloud. How are you feeling? There's a lot going on in the world. We're preparing for a semester. There's all kinds of things going on in Washington. There's all things going on across the nation. And I just want to get a feeling for how people are experiencing this, where you're at emotionally and otherwise. I'm going to have us, if it's okay, do that's the wrong one. Do a word cloud. And let me escape out of this. And what I'm going to do is, if you can see this, it's just poll everywhere. I've actually entered into this myself, but if you're texting, you can text to this address, or if you go to poll everywhere under this, you can put in one word about how you're feeling, what's going on. My word, and we'll kind of unpack this, is distracted. There's a lot of things that are pulling my attention right now because there's so much going on. I'm not going to be tracing people's responses, but please participate. Oh, I got a chat. Hold on. Let's see this. Oh, yes. Thank you for putting it in the chat, Rebecca. Yes. Okay. And the more similar responses we have of a kind or of a type, the larger the word will be. Just give another second, make sure folks have all had a chance to participate. Okay, I just want to look at what we have here. So it seems like a lot of us are tired, and that's not surprising to me. The spring was rapid fire and we had to change practice. The summer was challenging in a lot of different ways. A lot of things going on nationally, a lot of things going on locally. All of these things take up physical and emotional energy from us. So it's not surprising after a fall of, again, and as we enter a spring, people are tired, weary, both physically and emotionally, anxious, and unsettled. There's a lot going on. The events of last week can be unsettling. It could be other things. That we're still in the midst of a pandemic that is still very serious, with a number, it's affecting people in a lot of ways. Overwhelmed. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second, okay? Make sure everyone gets a chance to take this all in. So there's a reason that I wanted to do that as a start off, and I mean it's not, you know, some of it helps me understand where people are and how we're doing as we enter into the space, but more so, there's a lot that we're going through as individuals, a lot we're going through as a community. It's interesting, among the things that was a response there was hopeful, right? And I don't mean to sound hyperbolic or anything else like this, but one of the things that in my own recent reflections has really come forward in my mind, that now more than any other time, the work that we do as educators and as people working in higher education takes on so much importance. There is a lot of anger and hurt and strife in our world. There's a lot of lack of empathy and understanding. And the more that we can do, both to educate ourselves, but to actually help change those things about our local communities and nationally, the better. So I don't know, I don't want to just be myself flopping my gums. I don't know if anyone had anything else to share on this. I just think it's important for us to understand where we are, to honor what people are experiencing now. So I'll just open it up for anybody that wanted to add anything. Okay. I thank you for sharing things like this. And know, we're going through this, but as we prepare for the semester, our workers, our co-workers, our colleagues, the students coming to the institution will be experiencing similar sorts of emotional things, and being aware and sensitized to that, because that energy will come into the campus, into the classrooms, into the other spaces. And the better we are to understand not only what that means for ourselves, but what that may mean for other people in terms of their engagements and interactions, the better. Okay, so we'll keep moving along. Okay. Thank you for that. There we go. And we'll jump back in to the presentation. I want to talk about a value, and this is one that encapsulates a lot of things for me, but full participation. You may be familiar with this. It's in different corners and little parts of the academic universe and little places, but it's the definition of it is, on the screen here. It's an affirmative value focused on creating institutions and practices that enable people, whatever their identity, background, or institutional position, community position, to thrive, realize their capabilities, engage meaningfully in institutional life, and contribute to the flourishing of others, if they so choose. Right. A lot of the ways that I think about the work of my office or the work that can be done in communities is around cashing out full participation, right? And complementing conceptions of diversity with the idea or the concept of full participation, right? And moving past demographic conceptions of diversity in terms of just different types of ways of being in the world, to thinking about what it is to create contexts or maintain contexts and practices that enable people to flourish, okay? So when we think about full participation in action, there's this, and I'm sure people maybe have seen this sort of little cartoon here that picks out the difference between sort of equality, equity, and liberation, right? And as a lot has been said recently about anti-oppression work, anti-racist work that communities and institutions should take on, other sorts of anti-oppression work. So when we think about equality, that just sort of, as we can see by the fence here, it doesn't remove sort of the barriers necessarily. Benefiting those people equally does not necessarily take away from the things that prevent people from participation, okay? Equity changes that by creating practices and things like that that allow people to be more fully engaged in community life and things. So I'm talking in general, broad brushstrokes. And as a community and as individuals, in terms of our practice, as we move from equality conceptions to equity conceptions and practices to liberation conceptions where the barriers are removed and the things and the practices of equity that bolster people up, but maintain maybe some of the structures and practices that limited or marginalized people's opportunities, those are removed. And so as a community, this is part of the journey that we're on. As individuals within communities, these are part of the things that we are doing. Many calls for things around anti-racist or anti-oppression practices are looking more towards creating and cashing out liberation than they are other things. So we will keep moving forward. Okay. Okay. I want to just take a gloss. Oops, I want to go backwards. Hold on. Fast fingers. And talk a little bit about social identity in a broad sort of sense. Is a sort of a sense of a person, of their identity, of themselves, of who they are, connected to or based upon group membership or memberships, okay? Some social identity groups are based on physical or social mental characteristics, things like this. There are some social identities or identities that we ascribe to ourselves. There are others that are ascribed to us. Some of these things are visually or perceptibly recognizable, and others are not. They're not quickly identifiable in those kinds of ways. Some of the ways in which we conceive of ourselves, and it's important to reflect on who we are and the ways that we conceive of ourselves as we start to think about practices both in the classroom, but also within communities. So I'm going to stop share for a second. I'm going to take a little pause here. One of the things that is most readily social identities I have that is most readily recognizable about me as an individual is my race. It is one of the things I ascribe to myself, Blackness. Okay? It is also something that people ascribe to me as well. Not every social identity is as apparent as race. And while social identities do and are connected to forms or conceptions of difference, they're not merely reducible down to difference. They're more robust than that. Their histories and other things packed into them or wired into them are the content of them is more rich than just mere forms of difference, right? So dominant handedness is a form of difference that as a social identity is not going to function in the same ways in society or culture or in practice or impact individual lives as race, as gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, other things like that, ability, other things like that. So when we're talking about social identity, we're talking about these more robust conceptions of things like this that help, that are part of the ways in which people identify themselves, and also part of the ways in which other people pick out or identify individuals, okay? Want to see if there's any questions about that, anything people want to add about that at all on the call? Okay, well, you will keep going. All right. So I'm not going to spend much more time on social identity. There are separate work that we could do that could be a freestanding thing on its own and talking about exploring identities and how those identities intersect or combine with one another as a part of who I am. I'm simultaneously many things. I am cisgender, I'm heterosexual, I'm middle-aged, I have a racial identity, identify as Black. I have an ethnic identity, identify as Afro-Caribbean. There's a lot of things that are a part of who I am that come together to make who I am. And in different situations and contexts, different parts of my identities seem to be in play more than other parts of who I am. There's a lot of ways in terms of my life in Oswego County where my racial identity is one of the things that I really is at the forefront of my experiences. Working at Oswego in the 3 years that I've been here, a lot of things, one of the things that has really emerged in my awareness is my age and my distance between me in terms of my, the way that I see the world through the lens of a person who's middle-aged versus our students or versus younger professionals or other people like that, things like that. There's other things, my socioeconomic status, things like that are other parts of who I am that form not only how my self-concept, but how I experience the world, the lens through which I interpret or mediate my experiences, things like that, and so forth. But I'm going to keep moving on. Okay. Oops. Boy. Okay. Cultural competence. A general definition of cultural competence is one that it's about the ability to understand or communicate, effectively interact with people across cultures. It can be encompasses among other things, and there's a vast literature across disciplines and across contexts, both in higher education and in the professional corporate world, about cultural competence. But among the things that it encompasses are being aware of one's own world viewpoint, developing or curating positive attitudes towards cultural difference, and gaining knowledge about different cultural practices and different worldviews, different than our own, okay? I'm gonna stop sharing again. So I'm gonna ask a question of folks. So if we were to go back in time, a few decades, maybe to the mid 80s, there was a lot of ways in which cultural competence was pushed out as one of the primary ways that we should understand. But I want to talk just for a second about some of the positives and maybe some of the limitations of cultural competence. So this is going to require folks to turn their cameras back on and so forth like this. And we've got a range of experience or expertise about cultural competence because we have people are academic and people working in different venues. So anyone want to share some of the things that might be good about cultural competence?
I'll start.
Sure.
Okay. So I think from the academic point of view, I'll make a couple related ones. One is the issue of standardized testing, and standardizing testing throughout the 80s as someone who took, the college exams had no sense of cultural competence, right? Mm-hmm. So there was analogies about wave is to ocean or something, and without understanding that there's people who will sit for this exam that have never seen the ocean, right? And even I'm guilty of it as an instructor in the examples of economic textbooks that talk about related goods and use peanut butter and jelly. Well, someone who comes as an international student might not even know what peanut butter or jelly is, may never eat it, don't understand that there are goods that we associate together. And so a lack of cultural competency is often mistaken for a lack of academic performance when we just didn't care about it.
Yep, that's a really, really good point. I can remember as my niece would say, way back in the 80s, because I was alive then, and I grew up in the city of Rochester, we had standardized testing. And we had these two metropolitan exams, and we had some statewide exams, other kind of things we had to take. And one of them was purely academic. It was the sort of analogy kind of vocab kind of stuff you were talking about. One of the exams, though, it was interestingly, because you can see the shift. And I remember talking to my classmates about this. They asked how much a loaf of bread weighs, right? And there were people who were just completely puzzled by this. And I knew, because, I shopped and I also bagged at a grocery store because I had a job. So there's other things. So there was this, and there were other questions there. People were like, I don't know why they were asking us this. And it's just because it was instead of asking pounds to ounces or things like that, it was a move slowly towards putting these in different ways in which people may understand that in different contexts. Okay. So yeah, really great. Other folks that want to share, please.
I also think it's important to not or to underestimate individuals, that just because they may have different backgrounds, that they may not have experience or knowledge. So, I mean, I've had conversations with persons who are not educated or probably had a 4th grade education that have more knowledge than persons with college education. So it's important that we get to know individuals and where they are at their level.
And so in some ways, even the older versions of cultural competence that emerged help people to understand the experiences of other cultures, their values, things like that, and can do some of that work, okay? So there's, yeah. Other folks. Anyone else want to share?
Well, I have one. Back when in the 80s, I was actually in elementary school. So we used to have drills where we would have to hide underneath our desk or go in the hallway because of a potential nuclear attack. So, you know, some countries wouldn't have had to experience that, but we did because we were fighting with the Soviet Union at that time.
So different, so there are, you know, programmatically, cultural competence can be things that can not only get us in positions to share our experiences, but also can help us understand the experiences of other people, right? My sister, my older sister, was an exchange student during high school and was able to get into cultural contexts where she was engaging with people from different cultures, learning things. She actually was a fluent speaker of German, among all the other things that she can do better than I can. She went to Germany for an academic year as a part of this sort of high school study abroad. And part of that experience was her to be understanding the culture on its own terms and sharing American culture and her experiences with other folks as well. What are some of the challenges to cultural competence? What are some of the ways in which it is limiting? And so there's been a move in some parts of academia and literature and some parts of practice, sort of away from competence-based sort of models or conceptions of this knowledge acquisition or engagement or things like this. Anybody want to comment at all? So it's not just me flapping my gums.
I think for me, one of the biggest barriers for attaining cultural competence is not being cognitively flexible. You know, we are very rigid in our thinking sometimes, and we sometimes become so ethnocentric that we feel that we are superior than others, and that can really create problems in understanding why certain cultures have certain things in place and how it helps them. You know, they may, from our perspective, they may not seem like a good thing, but from their perspective, it works. And I think all cultures are pretty logical with the support systems that they have and pretty logical with things that they have. And it works for them. And that's why they continue and to maintain those support systems. So I guess cognitive flexibility is something that is required if we want to attain cultural competence.
And so that's really great, right? So some folks who criticize cultural competency is not necessarily older conceptions of it, doing enough of that work, right? You could actually have this kind of idea of Western superiority or American exceptionalism and get into these contexts and be like, oh yeah, we just need to make everybody else Americans and then they'll be all better off or something like that, or not appreciate cultures on their own terms for their own values and see the values of them, right? Okay. Other folks.
Just based off of what you just said, Rodman, I have to deal with a certain level of like a backlash against students, the education that they've received up until this point because of their lack of cultural competency. Just in my little world, specifically as it relates to federal Indian policy and Native American history.
Yeah, Michael, that's a really, and we could take up the rest of the session with that conversation. But and tell me if I'm presenting this in the wrong way, because I want to be respectful of your knowledge base and everything else like this. There are things that certain older versions of cultural competence will not help us unlearn. Okay, so you go through a P through 12 education, maybe in the past, and you get mythologized kind of conceptions and inaccurate conceptions of other cultures, of individuals, of things like this. And then when you are placed in a different context, maybe in a higher education context or something else like this, and those thoughts are challenged, it's harder, and going back to Monta's point, you get this rigidity, and it's harder to shake out of or unlearn those things and patterns that you had before, right? Great. Anyone else want to jump in? And we're not taking cultural competency out back to beat it down or just we're going to preserve some of the value in just a second, right? Or think about ways that maybe, okay. Anyone else before I chime in a bit and move us forward? Okay. All right. Yes.
I think Dr. King.
Yeah, please, Markel.
So with culture competency, like understanding the culture, I think is also important to, keep an open mind and realize that although you're learning about a, specific aspect of a person, not to generalize and stereotype when you meet other people of the same, cultures, making sure that you keep everyone, see them in an individualized manner.
Yep, I think that's great. One of the things, and this is again older versions of cultural competence training, things like this, and having gone through this in past parts of my professional life, way back in the 80s and so forth, there's a way in which it's the bad side of credentialing, okay? So there are older versions of cultural competence where you get training and you get your certificate, and you've got your certificate, and then there you go. Your journey's complete. You got your certificate, There's training that we have to do as employees of the institution on an annual basis, right? And we have to do these annual trainings. And at the end of the training, you get a certificate of completion, things like that. So there are some ways in which, and again, I'm not trying to overgeneralize or stereotype cultural competence or its evolution, but there's older versions of it where it made the journey finite. You get to credentialing and then you're done with that journey, okay? Sort of like getting your driver's license. Got my driver's license, took the test, I'm credentialed, I'm able to drive in New York State, I've taken this thing, I've done this training, I've got this other kind of thing and stuff like this. And even, I'd say, as recently as the 90s, I was working another institution and, as a faculty member at that time, and we were developing up some training, and you had people saying, yeah, I don't need to do this, right? I had one person say, look, I got a master's degree in anthropology. I don't need to, there's nothing for me to learn. I'm like, there's always something, and so there's a way in which certain forms, earlier and simplistic forms of cultural competence limit our journey, right? In some kinds of ways. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving us on. I know. And again, because you don't have Annika today, I'm not going to rush content, but I won't belabor it either. So if our time goes and we haven't gotten to everything, I'd rather that we have the discussions we have had, that I'm trying to bullet train us to the end of the presentation. So I may be wrong about that, but hey, I'm the one who's controlling the screen. So at least for this part. Okay, let's please move on. Okay, all right. Great, enough about cultural competence. And I want to say this, I don't want to get into this feasible thing where there's cultural competence over here and there's these other things over there. It's really, there's been some interesting work about a continuum, right? That cultural competence might be a point upon a continuum of people's journey where, and maybe some initial steps or midway steps, and including the practices of cultural competence in there. Okay. Cultural safety, this is another one. Cultural safety obtains when an environment is spiritually, socially, emotionally, psychologically, and also safe as well as physically safe for people, okay? Where there is no assault, challenge to in a marginalizing way, or denial of their identity or identities of who they are or what they need, right? So some of the things that we picked out as challenges of earlier forms of cultural competence created contexts that were not culturally safe. So when Mafta says, that there's this rigidity that can happen, or we can think about other cultures through our lens and not understand that their practices work for them or the practices have value for them on their terms, we, to the degree that we engage in that or have engaged in that in the past, it's not a culturally safe context or set of practices, right? It can deny the epistemology, culture, experiences of individuals and groups. So cultural safety is one of those things that has become a lot, talked about a lot, but really more so people focusing on it. How can we, not just in terms of general community context, but within our classrooms and within our practice, create contexts that are culturally safe, okay? We'll keep moving. Cultural humility. So this is a definition. It's one of the definitions, ones that I appeal to a lot, is the ability to maintain an interpersonal stance that is other-oriented or open to the other and in relation to the aspects of cultural or social identity that are important to the person. Right. That may not be completely clear, okay? And I want to talk a little bit more about cultural humility and then talk some and have us do some exploring and reflection, okay? Here's maybe a different way to think about it. And again, this is, I'm giving a baseline conception that is actually, there's a lot of different discussion on cultural humility across literatures and different disciplines. We're kind of narrowing our field of view down to a basic conception that I'm hopeful that everyone can understand. Central to cultural humility are sets of principles, maybe that guide thinking and behavior or the actions of individuals and institutions to positively affect interpersonal relationships and to affect systems and structures, maybe, be it communities or other things like this, okay? One of those, those principles, and again, this is a reduced down list of what is a larger list in a lot of other places. Lifelong learning and critical reflection is a key principle or concept or part of cultural humility. There's not an endpoint. You don't get your certificate and then go on. It is a lifelong commitment to critically thinking about yourself, your place in the universe, who you are, things like that, okay? Recognizing and challenging power imbalances, okay? Understanding that not everyone has the same opportunities, is allowed to be present in the same ways in different contexts. Understanding that there are people that have more motive power or societal power than others, not based upon merit or something else, just based upon who they are. And challenging those imbalances. Accountability is another thing. Now, again, there's a lot of other things. If you go around and look at the literature and things like this on cultural humility, there's wired into those other lists, other practices, other things. This is, at least from my experience, some of the central things that a lot of people talk about. Accountability, individually and institutionally, right? What does it mean to be accountable for who I am and for the impacts that I have on other individuals, on society, on the kind of community that we have? So I want us to take some time looking and reflecting on these principles with some of the time we have left. Okay? So let's start off with lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. Okay? So here's a quote. So if Annika was here, she'd do it better justice, but I'll tell you my interpretation of the quote. Not knowing is not from a lack of intelligence, but from a fund of knowledge that has not been filled. You don't know until you ask or until you're told, okay? Part of the lifelong journey is realizing not only the things that we don't know, but also some of the things that we may have to unlearn. As Michael said really well, some of the resistance that Michael encounters is people that have got these beliefs that they've been inculcated and having the challenge of trying to get them to understand not only what they don't know, but also the things that they may have to unlearn. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. I want us now to divide up into some breakout rooms for a second, okay? And I'm not gonna, I'm gonna give you sort of an open thing to talk about, okay? What I want you to talk about is reflect on your journey in this life, right? Think back to the earliest time that you, and let's think about yourself, right? The more predominant ways in which you identify or think about yourself. That can be in multiple ways, right? For me, it's going to be along the lines of race. So for me, in this exercise, I'll be thinking back about the earliest time that I realized that I had a racial identity. I want you to think about that experience as much as you can. What did you learn from that experience? And it could be along the lines of gender identity, gender expression, things like this. No one is required to share. I'm hoping that people will feel safe enough and willing enough to share some parts of their story. But that's what I want us to do in the breakout rooms, is to take some time to do that, okay? So reflect on that some. I'm gonna be jumping in and out of the breakout rooms to see, but Rebecca, if you could divide us up maybe into 2 breakout rooms, that'll work.
Okay, those rooms are, do you want them to close after a certain amount of time, Rodman?
Let's give it, let's say 10 minutes, okay? And we may close earlier. I'll jump in and see how people are going, if
Okay, here we go.
Problem. There's never enough time. I was in group 2 and this great Mont was in this middle of this great sentence, and now here we are back again. Okay. Let's just take a second. Just take a second. I've been watching CNN and national developments and everything else. This is an interesting thing because I don't tend to watch TV. I tend to read more stuff and print media and other things like that. But CNN has this thing, 30 seconds of calm, right? You're watching this, it's like, and then there's, horses on the seashore, cats playing with yarn. It's the aurora borealis. It's 30 seconds of calm. So before we go into the next sort of thing, 30 seconds of calm. And if folks just want to pipe in for a second, how was that discussion or exercise? How did you experience that? If you want to share, right? Was it good? Was it bad? Was it interesting? Anything anyone wants to share?
I think for me personally, it's always interesting because it's these firsthand experiences and perspectives that for me helps to keep keep me on my journey, if you will, to help me to keep thinking outside of my bubble. And I think it's really helpful to hear other people's experience of being othered or being realizing your own characteristics that are so obvious to other people, but maybe aren't as obvious to you because you're living that. That's what you've always been. I've always been white, you know, so I always find it interesting, and I appreciate this opportunity to hear other people's stories.
Yeah. And that's a really great observation, Carol. There's things that are so obvious to me because I am those things. Being Black, I've not been a time in my life when I've not been Black. So, but there's a lot of things that I don't experience and are not part of my direct experience and things like that. And I need to challenge myself to think about that. Those are big parts of my journey. The things that I don't know and I'm not aware of, and things that I have to unlearn, but also really thinking over time. I spent a lot of time thinking about my racial identity and trying to understand it on terms that I create and not and that aren't created for me, right? So that's part of it too. Someone else put something in the chat that I want to make sure. Yeah, Michael, thank you. So it was very open to sharing stories for students, but harder to open up with colleagues. Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't want to, you know, if you want to add more to that, Michael, that's great. Sometimes it's, you know, one of the hardest conversations I had about male privilege was with my father when he was still alive, because he was my father, right? It is harder for me to talk about this content and stuff we're talking about today, or the things that I do in my work, with members of my family, especially my younger brother. And so sometimes it can be harder with colleagues for a lot of reasons. Judgment may be one of them, other things, you know. In sharing, there can be vulnerability. And, you know, I don't want to be vulnerable with all of my colleagues, maybe. I don't know. But I don't want to label that for you, Michael. I don't know if you have more to add.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the vulnerability, but I would describe it as a lack of control too. Because when I'm open and I share with my students, I can come back to that later, or I can get feedback on that later. Like even though this is the Zoom, even if we're inside the classroom or in the Zoom, I have control over that. Yeah. And I have way less in this environment.
Exactly, because we could leave the Zoom and you and I don't talk to each other for a few weeks, right? Or a month. Really good point. Very true. Very, very true. Thank you for that. I'll say one last thing and we'll move on, okay? Because time's burning, but we're not going to rush. One of the things about this principle, or this part of cultural humility that's big for me, it reminds me of things that are part of my journey, right? So if you were to talk to an earlier instantiation of this guy, like maybe 20 or 30 years ago or so, or more, just about between 20 and 30 years ago, because of the work experiences I've had, I've worked over the course of my life in spaces that were dominated by women, okay? Where I was the only male in the space. And I remember a time in my life where, you know, I actually wanted to credit those experiences. I learned a lot by being in a context where I was the only male, and there were women in leadership experience. I mean, this is back. I mean, I did secretarial work as part of my career decades and decades ago. And so I was a male secretary and things like this, and seeing how gender dynamics and everything else like this and so forth. And I remember saying to a colleague at the time, you know, it's like, you know, I'm really starting to understand, you know, what it may be like to be a woman, right, in male contexts. And this individual said, no, you don't. and I was like, whoa, what do you mean? Because even though I'm a male or a man in context where I'm the only man and there's many more women, my male privilege still popped up to the fore. And she pointed out times like there's a time we had an entire office lunch, and the person was asking me about who should order first, was giving me the check. I'm the secretary, not to be classist or to have professional bias. I'm not the one who makes those decisions. So there's things that I learned, but I also have to be aware of the ways in which being of a small number is not the same as necessarily being marginalized or underrepresented. Because even though I was a small number in that office, it opened my eyes to stuff, but it didn't pull me away from my cisgendered Val privilege. So part of my journey is reflecting on these things and understanding both the things that I'm learning, but understanding them in context with the things I still need to work on myself with. There's a lot of things. But this is not my diary. This is a session for all of us. So we are going to move on. Okay. So we are going to put that down. That's some prompts here. Okay. Back into the presentation. Okay. All right. Lifelong learning. We'll keep moving. Okay. We've got a few more minutes. Probably have time for one more breakout session before we're done. So we won't rush. Okay. Cultural humility also involves thinking. It does not just merely thinking about a list of traits, but thinking about involves you, your assumptions, how you project them onto others, right? And this is a nice quote. I don't know who to attribute it to. If Annika was here, she'd probably know the answer. But Annika is going to be back with us soon, and we will miss her talents. But a fish doesn't see water, okay? Sometimes it's hard to see the media, the mediums we're in, the context we're in, the relations that we stand in, you know, and it's hard for us to reflect on those. So I'm gonna put us into breakout rooms again. Now, this time with the breakout rooms, I want us to reflect on something else, okay? I want us to think about a time when you participated in, engaged in what now gets called sort of equity evasive thinking, which in earlier parts of the literature was called either sort of color blindness or things like this. That's been changed because of the ableist notions encapsulated in color blindness, right? Or things like this. So folks have shifted towards equity evasive thinking or practice or things like that. And among other things, making assumptions about others or failing to notice certain kinds of dynamics or things like that, or inadvertently falling into racist or racially marginalizing, ableist, sexist, or heterosexist language or thought, and what you can learn from those experiences, right? And again, this is for people to share. And I'll just kind of say something really quickly before we go off into the breakout rooms. I was at a professional conference years and years ago. There's not time for another breakout. Rebecca's telling me, oh, okay, we'll talk some here amongst ourselves. Time goes so quickly because there's another 80-minute session coming up. I'll say this and I'll shut up quickly because I want other people to share. I was at a professional conference. It was the big hootenanny hoedown for philosophers, which is, people go into philosophy because there's no other place for them in life. I can say that because I'm a card-carrying philosopher. And so we at this place, but it was a great conference for me. Charles Mills, who wrote this book, The Racial Contract, and does all this stuff, he was there, and I got to sit down and talk with him, like this person who I really respect this work, and this other person, this Afro-Caribbean philosopher, Bernard Boxall. And I'm sitting at a table, and they're talking to me, this little insignificant person, and engaging with me. It was a great conference. And I was at the elevators and so forth, and talking to another attendee who had the exact opposite experience of me. This person was non-binary and they were differently abled, and the conference was traumatizing to them. And I'm sitting there in this conversation with them, sort of like in my mind, kicking myself. Not everybody's having my experience. I'm thinking this is great for everybody. It's not great for everybody. was really comfortable navigating this conference and this context and the terms that I'm familiar with, and was unable to see the other things going on around me. And that's a low level example of stuff and things like that. But do other people want to share?
I can share one activity that I do with my students, which I didn't realize actually can be pretty traumatizing, the way you were saying, Rodman. So one of the activities that I do with my students is to trace the history of their last name. And for some students, that can be extremely hard because of the, historical, things that have gone on in our country. So that can be pretty traumatizing. I never thought that would be, but it is, So simple things like that, we need to be careful about what we are doing. We have to be cognizant of the fact that it may not work for everybody.
Mamta, that's really good. There's things I used to do when I was teaching, and even stuff in similar roles that I've done. Things like privilege walks, right? Where you have these series of questions and people, locate and things like that. And I changed the practice around doing those, and actually really radically changed those things, because feedback at one of the sessions, doing a community-based session years ago, and a person said, "This is an act of violence," and I was just floored by it, right? And then in engaging in dialogue with them, we had a dialogue around this. It was so obvious. It's reinforcing their marginalization in ways that was really, really not good, and had to transform the practice, and had to do some work to address that, in that session and following sessions as well. So there's things like that, that are important to catch and to realize, and this is part of the cultural humility practice and thought. So I think we're out of time. Is there time for one more person to go, Rebecca, before we have to jump? People have to go to other sessions, or?
I can give you like 2 more minutes, Rodman.
2 more minutes. Okay, so please, I'm going to shut my gob, and please, other folks.
So I have a question. One of the things when we're thinking about, some of the practices that we have in the classrooms, and anything can be traumatizing to anyone. So even if we try a different route, it may actually influence someone else. So what is the solution? Because one of the things that I do is I try to bring both different perspectives and let those who may feel marginalized or have a different experience talk about that experience, and then allow them to share how to address that. But what are your recommendations?
So that's really, really good. I mean, there's this may be a conversation, Naja, that we have to have sidebar, because I can't encapsulate everything. Some of the things you said are really key. Empowering people to do this on their terms is really important. That's one of the things. And so I want to also distinguish between maybe things that may be the continuum of things that people may claim under trauma that are unsettling, versus things that are really traumatic in a clinical kind of sense, right? Me understanding or coming to terms with gender privilege or things like that, or socioeconomic privilege, or the ways that I, by living my life in certain kind of ways, are contributing either actively or passively to the marginalization of others, that's unsettling, right? Those things can be really unsettling in terms, because my self-concept and the way I am in the world are not aligning, right? I think I'm a good person, but then, there's these things that I do and I participate in that are, so that being unsettled is not necessarily a bad thing. That's can be part of an education process. Things that hook into maybe the more clinical ends of trauma, those are the things that we need to work on. And when you're in these contexts, especially around experiences, empowering people to do those on their terms instead of terms that are dictated to them can be a really good practice, right? But we can talk more than that. I'll say this too, we didn't get to other stuff. Rebecca, I'll make sure to get the slides and everything to you so that they can be put up on the CELT website and everything else. Look, thank you all for coming. I'm sorry that I'm not I am the light version, light yogurt version of Annika. She would have done she had prepared for this and really would probably done a much more dynamic presentation and so forth. But I thank you for your participation. I thank you for taking the time to do this. I ask you to continue on your journeys and so forth. We'll be sharing not only the presentation, but we'll also have some resources there. And again, these are not prescriptive, but just some things that folks can look at. There's some good things. I've been really looking at Dr. Singh's book, the Racial Healing Handbook, which I really like a lot. It's a nicely encapsulated but really good way for people to reflect, but also to some exercises and things that you can work with students on. But we'll get a list of those things out of there. We're out of time because time is infinite, but we don't experience it that way. Look, thank you again. Have the great rest of your day, and thanks.